President Trump, in his first hours of office, announced hundreds of pardons, and several of those charged for their roles in the January 6th Capitol riots, including the first round of pardons, which had Jacob Chansley of Phoenix, also known as a QAnon shaman. Chansley made the announcement on his X account, thanking President Trump. Chansley served 41 months in federal prison, pleading guilty to a felony of obstruction. Chansley became the poster boy for that day. Pictured shirtless in the Capitol's hallways, wearing his horns and his coyote-tailed headdress, carrying a spear, Chansley was ordered released early after it was determined that he committed no violence that day.
That is crazy, y'all. Jacob Chansley, often recognized as QAnon Shaman, is an American Navy veteran, public speaker, and activist whose striking image during the events of January 6, 2021 at the U.S. Capitol propelled him to national and international notoriety. Born in Phoenix, Arizona, Chansley served honorably in the U.S. Navy, a foundation that instilled in him a deep sense of patriotism and duty to his country. Post-service, he became known for his distinctive advocacy, combining a unique blend of spirituality, environmental consciousness, and a staunch commitment to preserving constitutional freedoms. Chansley rose to prominence as a symbol of the growing frustration many Americans feel towards our government overreach and unaddressed grievances. His presence at the Capitol, marked by his buffalo horn headdress, fur hat, and patriotic face paint, was seen by some as emblematic of a larger movement calling for transparency and accountability in the government. While his actions led to legal consequences, Chansley has remained a polarizing figure, drawing both criticism as well as admiration. And today we're going to talk about how Chansley went on to borderline debate a Capitol police officer. I hope you guys enjoy. This is my first time seeing this. This will be interesting.
Complaining that they weren't doing enough to prosecute. Actually, what was happening, his White House counsel and his DOJ were coordinating these local, state, and federal prosecutions. And then just to finish, there were three things about all of them that I think in retrospect, any historian who's honest will admit. Those crimes, quote unquote, will never be applied to anybody else. About real estate evaluations on a loan that was functioning and the bank had no problem, or what. Every disgruntled candidate calls up the registrar and says, I know there's votes there, can you recount them? So, and then two, had Donald Trump just said, you know, I don't want to run for a third time, he would have never been in any of these courtrooms. And third, if he hadn't been Donald Trump, he would. Yeah. And everybody knows that in the United States now, and it's going to be a stain. And I hope that Donald Trump, when he said he doesn't want to do that to his enemies, I hope if there are any investigations, they don't come out of the Pam Bondi Donald Trump connection. If they are, they're going to have to be independent, local or state, or a special prosecutor. But I think that was wise of him to say it, and I hope he keeps to it.
Yeah, I agree. Victor Davis Hanson, great to have you back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, to debate all this, I'm joined by PBD podcast Angry Patriot, Vinny Oshana, by Wajahat Ali, who's the host of Democracy-ish, by Jacob Chansley, formerly known as the QAnon Shaman, who was just pardoned by Donald Trump, and by a former Capitol police officer who was attacked on January the 6th at the Capitol, Winston Pigeon. So thank you all for joining me. Greatly appreciate it. Wajahat, let me start with you.
Hey, Kim.
How hamstrung do you feel about launching a full throttle attack, as I know you've been doing and are itching to do, about Trump's?
Let me know what you guys think about that J6 event, because a lot of people are for it, or a lot of people are against it. It's a very, very polarizing event. So let me know what you guys think.
Abuse of the pardon system as you see it, given Joe Biden's obvious blatant abuse, which we've just heard from Victor Davis Hanson, unprecedented apart from when Ford pardoned Nixon. We've never seen preemptive pardons like this. How neutered do you feel? I mean, do you feel like every time you try and go after Trump for this, everyone on the right will go, hang on, what about your guy?
No, I'm not worried about that at all. And it's interesting that I never thought I'd be old enough to share a panel with a violent insurrectionist who voluntarily joined a mob incited by Trump to overthrow a free and fair election. But this is America. And To answer your question, Pierce, I actually want to read very quickly some words by an author who I agree with, who shares my sentiments. I'm going to quote him very quickly. The Republican Senate cowards should hang their heads in shame. Pretending the Capitol riot wasn't a Trump-inspired insurrection is as deluded as saying 9/11 had nothing to do with bin Laden's terrorism. The author continues, and I completely agree with this author, that Donald Trump was the man whose ugly, violent rhetoric directly led to what happened on January 6th. He took the most powerful megaphone in the world and he screamed at his enraged, unhinged, diehard fan base to go to the Capitol that day and fight for his presidency, that he lied about being stolen from him. So that's exactly what thousands of them did. Many of the rioters have said it in their own words, that it was Trump's command that drove them to the Congress. And finally, shame on Donald Trump for continuing to perpetuate a grotesque, inflammatory lie that threatens to imperil the very foundation of American democracy, end quote. That was you, Piers Morgan, 4 years ago in the Daily Mail. I share your sentiment.
Yeah, it was me. That is what I wrote at the time. That is what I felt at the time. And I didn't think we'd ever see Donald Trump run for office again. I was wrong. Not
So
wrong
what
about.
changed?
I wasn't wrong about
What
the
changed?
sentiments I expressed that day. I thought it was horrendous. However, the pardons have happened. Jacob Chansley, you became incredibly well known because of the image of you as a QAnon shaman at the time. I believe you've now renounced QAnon. You're no longer a QAnon identifying person. A, is that correct? Can I just verify that with you?
QAnon is a fiction created by the mockingbirds and the media to discredit Q and the anons that follow Q. So
Okay.
I was never a part of any QAnon, community. I've always, just followed Q.
What do you say to Wajahat, who's just obviously let you have it with bells on and thinks that dangerous insurrectionists, as you put it, should never be pardoned in the way that they have been? What's your response?
He's entitled to his opinion. I believe in freedom of speech, even if I disagree, especially if I disagree with what he says. He's allowed to be wrong in America. That's perfectly fine.
So it's hard to really gauge what everyone believes. I'm assuming Piers Morgan supports the pardon, although he initially did not support the pardon. He hasn't spoken yet, but the guy in the middle is definitely not a fan of the January 6th pardons. If you guys have just joined the live, the guy with the American flag background is known as QAnon Shaman or Jacob Chansley, one of the biggest pardons by Donald Trump recently for the J6 quote unquote insurrection. Let me know what you guys think about this event. Even within the conservative community, a lot of conservatives do not support this event. And the guy on the far right, I believe, is a police officer who was at the event. So let me know what you guys think about this. I don't know all the details of the pardon necessarily. I don't know if he was a part of a violent or non-violent part of the J6 event. But yeah, let's continue.
I really don't care what he thinks. I know what the day was. I know what it was for me personally and what it's been for literally thousands of American families across this country. Having the government weaponized against you is the very thing that people on the left used to cry about all the time until they got in office and they were able to weaponize the government against their political opponents, which is exactly what happened. And the media did their bidding too. They were their handmaiden. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the devious and nefarious hand inside of the government glove, or has been inside the government glove for the last several decades and the last 4 years, that's doing all this to the American people and circumventing the Constitution in the name of a state of emergency?
Okay, I mean, my question for you, watching those scenes on January the 6th that day, was surely no American could watch those scenes and not think it was a shameful moment for America. Whatever the motivation for what was behind it, whatever people felt they'd been encouraged or otherwise to do by Donald Trump, the fact that a very large group of people basically tried to ransack the Capitol in the way that happened, the home of democracy in America, those images went around the world and the world was genuinely horrified, Jacob. How do you feel when you look back at those images?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What would you do if you found out that the whole thing could have been prevented, was actually government orchestrated, and all the blood that happened on January 6th is on the hands of people like Nancy Pelosi, Yogananda Pittman, Mark Milley, all the people that Victor David Hanson just talked about, they're the ones that set this whole thing up. This thing has the fingerprints of a regime change all over it. And our government has become expert level at regime change. The media wasn't talking about Sergei Dubinin, the known Ukrainian spy that was in the crowd on that day, and actually asked to take a picture with me, as funny as that is. The FBI asked
Well, let me ask you, all right,
who this is.
all right,
I said,
Jacob, before I
no.
go, okay,
So,
Jacob, hang on. Jacob, before I go to Winston to respond, because he was there, he was a police officer that day at the Capitol. But why were you doing it then? I mean, presumably you weren't told to do it by somebody from the FBI or any of these other theories that were been propagated since. What was your purpose in storming the Capitol that day? What did you want to achieve?
I think that's a very fair question because someone in the comment, Christine Fuller, said the people ransacking the Capitol are not Trump supporters. So I love the fact that P.S. Morgan just asked him, what was your purpose that day when you stormed the Capitol? I know during that time, 2021, there was a lot of political divide, even more so then than there is today. So this is going to be a very interesting discussion.
You asking me?
Yes.
What my purpose of storming the Capitol?
Yeah.
Look, dude, I didn't storm anything. I entered the building illegally to stop vandalism, violence, and theft, which was proven all on video by me stopping somebody from stealing 30 seconds getting into the building, volunteering to help the police. That's why I was escorted to the Senate chamber, and also like saying a prayer inside the chamber and then stopping people from breaking in when I was outside the building. I literally stood in front of an angry mob and told everybody to go home because Donald Trump said to go home. I played his tweet. I played his video tweet on my megaphone, told everybody to go home. I stood in front of an angry mob trying to break into the Capitol, and none of this was said in the media because it was their narrative was the House of Cards. I was there.
So everyone was telling me to watch that video. I'm assuming that's the video you guys were referring to. Obviously, in that video, he wasn't doing anything that he was not supposed to do. That's just the reality of the situation. Of course, there could have been things that happened outside of the video, but what I just seen, it wasn't anything, crazy. But let me know what you guys think.
Their Achilles heel, and Tucker Carlson knew that, and that's why he aired that footage, and he totally destroyed the Mockingbird media's narrative about January 6th.
Okay, let me go to Winston. You were there that day. You're a Capitol police officer. What are your feelings about the fact that everyone involved has been pardoned, even the ones who were violent to police officers?
I think it's very unfortunate that particularly those that were violent and who attacked both me and my fellow officers that day are able to walk totally free. It sends a horrible message to Americans, to the world, to law enforcement, not only Capitol Police, DC Police, who have continued to show up every day, do their jobs in service to others, in service to the American people, to Congress. And, it basically says that it's okay to do political violence against and beat police officers. It says that there's nothing wrong with that.
Do you think there's a...
No, what says that that's okay is the BLM riots. It says that's okay is the Antifa riots, and there being no prosecutions. That's what says that's okay, is attacking federal buildings and no prosecutions. That's what says that's okay. Forgive me for saying, I don't mean to interrupt, but the double standard, what Victor Davis Hanson was talking about, the asymmetrical justice system is on full display. And to deny that the Antifa and BLM riots didn't play a role in the demoralization of our police officers and the allowance of this crime spree all across the country is just absolutely silly. The idea that is not to blame is silly.
Well, it's an interesting point, Winston, isn't it?
What about it?
So what he basically just said was that during the J6 day, it is hypocritical to say that they have a problem with that, but not having a problem with the BLM riots. That's what he's implying. From his point of view, he's saying that if you're going to criticize J6, then you 100% have to criticize any type of BLM riot there was, because during these riots, no one was arrested or no one was thrown in jail. That's what he's saying. Let me know what you guys think about that sentiment.
No, it's horrible, this whataboutism. I was a police officer for 5 years. I worked in 2020, the summer in DC. I will not condone any violence against police for whatever political cause, whether it was then on January 6th. And I'm glad we can agree on that. But the difference is that
on January 6th, it was not just a riot on the street. There were those like yourself that entered this building illegally and others who were violent against us. And it had never happened before. Not since the War of 1812 and 1814, when the British stormed the Capitol, had this ever happened. Not since the Civil War had we been so divided.
Allow me to apologize. Please allow me to apologize on behalf of all January 6ers and all Trump supporters for what happened to you guys. I don't know if that's happened on live television yet, but allow me to apologize to the police on behalf of all J6ers and all Trump supporters for what happened to you guys on that day. It's absolutely terrible. And if you find out that your own Capitol Police people like Yogananda Pittman or, Tom Manger are covering up what actually happened and the fact that they put you in harm's way, I think you guys have a vested interest in a class action lawsuit for your own work environment, putting you guys in harm's way.
So it seems as though the sentiment in the chat is that a lot of police officers and the FBI were in on this. Let me know if you guys agree with that, because people are saying that the government let them in, or they're saying that police officers let them in. I also seen comments saying that Nancy Pelosi denied extra security on this day.
I appreciate that apology. I think, though, the bigger picture is, as an officer, we never victim blame. When a crime is committed against somebody, it is not their fault. And it's more important to look at the bigger picture. Why was that crowd there that day? Who sent them? I remember people telling me that day on January 6th, President Trump sent us here. We are going to get in that building, and thinking there's no way they're going to be so violent, so brutal to actually get past us and break inside, until very shortly after I'm seeing for my own eyes that I was wrong and that the mob, was. And again, could Capitol Police have been more?
Were you talking to Ray Epps? No. Is that who you were talking to?
Well, I want to ask Winston a question, which is this. Winston, do you see a difference between people that day who committed acts of violence against police officers and people like Jacob here who did not? I mean, do you see a qualitative difference between the two? J.D. Vance said he could see an argument for pardoning the non-violent rioters, and I see that argument. They'd all been imprisoned, almost all of them, and many people felt some of the sentencing was way over the top for non-violent acts. Do you see a difference between the two?
I do see a difference, of course. Somebody who just entered the building illegally did not commit as bad an act as those who used a stun gun against my fellow officers, who used bats and 2x4s, bear spray against us. Of course, there is a difference there. I'd like to think some people there that day normally would respect police. They had Blue Lives Matter flags. I like to think that some of those people just perhaps got caught up in the moment and make mistakes. However, we all make mistakes, but we must be held accountable for our actions. The justice system imposed, these people got due process. Trump says they're hostages. It acts like they, were victims of this. They're only victims of their own actions. And so, sure, I can see a difference. But again, when you put a blanket pardon like this, particularly those who were violent, it is offensive. And I know Capitol Police officers today who are still working, very upset by this action. Why should they continue to do their jobs every day if violence against them is just not going to matter?
Right. And Jacob, before I go to Vinny,
and that rationale applies to Joe Biden and all the pardons he just put out.
Yeah.
Okay, this is going to get a little, it seems like this is about to get a little crazy. So what the police officer said, it actually makes a lot of sense. If you're going to commit a violent act against a police officer, you have to pay the price. I'm sorry, I don't care what side you're on. If you committed a violent act against a police officer, you need to pay that price. I don't care who you are, you're paying that price. And when you let out people who committed violent acts against police officers, that's when it gets wild. That's when it gets wild. I would be the first to admit I don't know all the details that happened on J6. From the comments, it seems like there's a lot of people who believe that it was set up by the feds or was set up by the feds. That is crazy. They're saying that they didn't even do anything violent. They probably didn't. This is like a big event. This is crazy for me.
We're going to come to that, Jacob.
Jacob,
before I go to Vinny for his response, he's been waiting patiently. I would just ask you the same question. Do you see a difference yourself? I mean, what do you say about those on the day who did commit acts of violence against police officers? Do you see a difference between them and people like you?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I need
do.
to do my
To be
research.
perfectly honest with you, but I respect the president's decision to pardon those people, and I'll tell you why. Because what happened in 2020 with the riots and what's happened with the pardons that Joe Biden has put out there, attention has to be drawn to that. And Donald Trump pardoning some people, that a small percentage of people.
Yeah, I'm saying I need to do some research. I haven't done it yet. I don't know what happened on that day. I don't know what happened. Hey, super chat, LFR family! Thank you for the $99 super chat, $100. Yeah, I haven't done my research on that event. It was crazy. Thank you for the super chat. Yeah, I'm not uninformed. I'm uninformed about this specific event. I'm not uninformed as a human, but when it comes to J6, I just don't know. That's why I'm looking at the comments. I'm reading. I'm learning about it. Let's get it.
That harmed police officers or committed acts of vandalism on that day is nothing compared to the damage that was done by the pardons that Joe Biden did, or by the psyop that was perpetrated on the American people by Russia for 4 years, by the Hunter Biden laptop suppression, by these 51 intelligence agents lying, then going after all these people because of January 6th, all the lives that were destroyed. Like, I would way rather have J6ers on the street that hit a cop than I would a child molester from Nicaragua.
Okay.
Oh,
look, you make a lot of points there, some of which
I would have neither.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what would be my point. But before I go to Vinny, Jacob, just to be clear, it seems to me like you would unreservedly condemn.
Guys, I have a question. So were the people on J6, were they given a trial? I heard that a lot of them weren't given a trial. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because this event happened in 2021. It's 2025 right now. So were they sentenced? Were a lot of them still waiting a sentence? And the reason I say that is because it's been 4 full years. It's been literally 4 years. So if you do the math, if they had to, and the reason it's funny is because this just shows all the problems in our legal system. How could you sit in jail for 4 years with no trial? That is crazy. That should be illegal. But that's the question I have.
The rioters that day who committed acts of violence against police officers, would you?
I believe in nonviolent non-cooperation with evil. If you cooperate with an evil system, you contribute to its evil. That's Gandhi right there, and that's truth. So I believe in nonviolent non-cooperation.
Ooh.
So is that you would condemn the people who committed acts of violence against police officers?
I believe that they have served their time enough, and they've felt the full weight of the government,
that's not the question.
Is something that very few people.
That's not my question.
I condemn violence that happened on January 6th, but I also agree with the pardons.
That's fair enough. But just to be clear, you do condemn the people who committed acts of violence.
Thank you. They were pardoned because they were in jail 4 years with no trial. Hey, that sounds a little logical to me. If you were in jail for that long, 4 years, and you didn't get a trial, you better pardon me. You better pardon me. If I was in jail for 4 years with no trial, that's crazy.
That day, the rioters who were violent.
I just answered your question.
It's a yes. Just to be clear, I don't want to misquote you, so I'm just pinning you down to say yes.
Hey, then play the tape back, buddy.
Well, you said you condemn acts of violence, so by definition, I'm assuming you are condemning the rioters who committed acts of violence.
Now you're starting to think for yourself.
Well, can you just say yes or no?
This is funny.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Listen, you know what? I actually appreciate that honesty. I appreciate the candor. I think it moves the debate to a better place when people on all sides of this can concede things which actually we should all agree on. There can be an argument about whether Trump should have pardoned them. There should be no argument, especially when we have one of these police officers sitting in this panel, that violence against police officers is never acceptable and should always be condemned. Vinny, you've been very patient.
100%.
Vinny, let me bring you in. Actually, a really interesting debate, this. And I honestly, all of it has been fascinating to me. And to actually have one of the people who's been pardoned next to one of the police officers and reaching some points of agreement, I think is a really important thing. Vinny, what do you feel about this? The Republicans were split. Many Republicans, including J.D. Vance, did not want the ones who were violent against police officers to be pardoned. It does seem to fly in the face of what most Republicans would think, which is if you commit an act of violence against police, you should not be pardoned. What do you think?
Well, first, Piers, I want to congratulate you. Your friend finally inaugurated into the White House. He's going to stop this bleeding that's been happening with this country. I was there, Piers. I sent your producers a bunch of videos. The guy's done more in 3 days than Joe Biden has done his entire career. The moment we saw him at the Capital One Arena, he sat down and started citing executive orders and got to business. Number one. Number two, Piers, in regards to the Jan 6 and all the pardons and everything, I've met Jacob in person. What the media told us about this guy, he's a monster. He did this. I met him in person. I interviewed him. Amazing guy, great heart. He's intellectual. He knows what he's talking about. He loves this country, okay? And what happened on January 6th, I know Wyatt said something about free and fair election. That's what you believe. The American people don't believe that. The majority of us, 81 million votes, all the discrepancies, FBI at Twitter, all the cheating or election interference. I think that day, in regard to Winston about January 6th, my heart goes out to him because to me, he was a victim. For Nancy Pelosi and all them holding back 10,000 National Guard troops, all the games playing, he was a pawn in the game of destroy Donald Trump no matter what, okay?
Oh, but Vinny, let me ask you though, Vinny, I mean, look, that may well be the case. That may well be the case, but it doesn't change the fact that thousands of people, as part of a large group of people, did storm the Capitol and
Oh, that's a good question. How come nobody wants to investigate why there were 20 million more votes in the 2020 election than any other year? I was talking about this. I feel as though when we talk about this event, we ignore why that day happened. It's all started from that election that people just don't want to talk about. Whether or not you think it was fair or not fair, you can't just avoid the conversation, which I feel like a lot of people have been doing. But yeah, that's a fair question.
Many of them broke in, and some of them committed acts of violence against police in the process. None of that, I mean, all of it looked appalling. Okay. I got to be to the rest of the world, it looked like America lost its mind, right? What when you look back on it now, we can debate the nuances of who should have been pardoned and so on. I do think some of them more peaceful protesters got way too big sentences for what it's worth. I don't think they were all violent. They shouldn't be treated the same way. But I do think any violence against police officers, I'm staggered that Donald Trump has pardoned them. Honestly, I am. I wouldn't have done it if I was there. I agree with JD Vance's position on that.
But Piers, okay, and Piers, by the way, I was a military police in the United States Air Force. Any violence, period, I'm not for it. But that day, Piers, let's think about it. Where was the insurrection? Who had the guns? Who was violent? The FBI, Christopher Wray. We don't even know how many FBI agents, how many informants, how many people you're shooting rubber bullets in people's faces and acting as if they're not going to be upset. Okay, we saw the footage of everybody inside. Who was shooting? Who was taking over? Where was the insurrection? Where was it, Piers? Donald Trump didn't go in there and do all of this. A big group of people came in there. Who knows how much they were freaking.
But Vinny, they were all breaking the law. Vinny, they were all breaking the law.
Yes.
We have to agree that, right?
Yes. And okay, Piers, I agree. And do you think who died that day, Piers? Who was actually the highest crime is murder? Okay, a Capitol Police, Michael Byrd, shot Ashley Babbitt and murdered her. Okay, unarmed United States Air Force veteran. What he got pardoned as well. Okay, and yes, Piers, it looked bad, but you know what? When the system, you believe the system's cheating you, you go to the system and you protest. And when he was talking about BLM and all the riots, everybody burned down their own city. Why the hell would you do that? If you have a problem with the police department, go to the police department. Why are you burning down Black-owned businesses? Why are you burning down Black-owned businesses? Why are you burning down your city? Okay, these people felt like they were cheated. And you know what? The facts have come out. They were. So they went to protest. And unless we find out with all the evidence that was destroyed, who was involved, who was in there, Antifa people dressed as Trump supporters, FBI agents inside the Capitol, unless we have all those facts, Piers, you don't know who was actually at fault and who was doing what.
Okay, I mean, what I would say about...
So he basically just went off. He's saying that he's calling out the hypocrisy with people treating J6ers as if they are some sort of terrorist when there were other groups of people who protested and were not treated within the same regard. He's saying that if you're going to be this hard on J6ers, you have to be this hard on everyone who protests. But it seems as though to me, Piers Morgan doesn't think they protest. He, in my opinion, thinks that they are terrorists or domestic terrorists and they stormed the Capitol. But from what's his name, Vinny said no, they were protesting and they were treated unfairly, and it's unfair how you're going to talk to them like this and hold them in jail for 4 years without a trial, without doing the same for the BLM protests. I want to see how Piers Morgan is going to respond to this logically, because people even in the comments are saying it was not an insurrection, and they were also saying that Trump was robbed of the last election. But let's continue to see how they respond.
We now know that they were cheated. Actually, we don't, because there's never been any evidence produced that 2020 election was rigged. Donald Trump keeps saying it. I wish he wouldn't. He doesn't need to say it. He's won big now. He doesn't need to go back over that again. But actually, including Republican judges, nobody has ever found any concrete evidence that election was rigged. So the reason why people... hang on, Vinny. The reason why people were protesting in the way they did was because they believed it. I certainly believe that. But the reality is it's never been backed up by actual hard evidence, even by Republican judges who've studied it. So this premise that somehow it was illegally stolen from Donald Trump the first time, I've said it to his face, and I believe it now, just as I still believe what I wrote in that column that Wajahat quoted from earlier. I just think that there are certain things where people can continue to say it was stolen and rigged and so on, but you've got to actually at some point stump up the hard evidence, and it's never happened.
May I say something, Piers?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah.
Hang on, Benny. I'll come back to you.
So Piers Morgan said that there's absolutely no evidence that the election was rigged. He said that even conservative judges have not found any evidence to prove that the election was rigged. So the belief that it was rigged and justifying the some people say it was protesting, some people say it was storming the Capitol, using that the election was rigged as a means to storm it is completely false. That's what Piers Morgan said. That is very interesting. And for those asking about my personal beliefs about the J6, when J6 happened, I was borderline a high schooler, so I'm learning more about it as we go. It's so much information out about it. It's hard to find like real sources and what's telling me the truth. Everyone believes something different. Some people were there and they say it was one thing. Some people were not there. They say it was this thing. It's just a lot of misinformation. I don't know. It's a lot going on.
Let Wajahat respond, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, Piers, look, you and I have disagreements, but we have agreements. And I read that part of your column because I agree with it. Shame on Donald Trump for continuing. This is the key word. Continuing to perpetuate a grotesque, inflammatory lie that threatens to imperil the very foundation of American democracy. What is that?
Before he gets too deep, I will say this. I will never support the violence of a police officer. I'm just not going to do it unless the police officer harms you first and you're defending your life and it's a life or death situation where you have to get out of it. If you're harming anyone, especially a police officer who protect and serve, I don't support the violence. I don't support their violence. Some people say they didn't harm them, so that's something. Some people say they were other police officers harming other police officers. It's a lot.
That lie that he won the 2020 election that he lost. And you and me, we've been on your show before. We've talked about it. It's time for him to move on.
Yeah, I agree.
He won 2016. He won 2024. He continues to perpetuate this lie to the point, Piers, where now 80% of Republican voters believe the lie. And some of them were incited by that lie, invited by Donald Trump. In fact, Jacob's former attorney said that Jacob was a guest of Donald Trump, that he was duped by Donald Trump, that he apologized for being there. That was Jacob's former attorney, right? These people were there. These are regular Americans.
Former attorney.
I said former attorney.
Former attorney.
Former attorney. These people were fellow Americans. These people were fellow Americans. They weren't evil. They didn't have horn on their heads. They truly thought that this election was stolen, which it wasn't. No proof has come out that it was stolen. Joe Biden won, just like Donald Trump won in 2024.
But do you accept? All right, but Wajahat, do you accept the argument? Hang on, guys.
Sorry, go ahead.
But Wajahat,
sure.
Wajahat, do you accept? Because I do, that there was a clear double standard in the way that people who protested through the BLM months of extreme violence, in many cases, trashing institutions and buildings, attacking police. I mean, a lot of people were involved in this. That there was a clear double standard in the way that they were collectively treated by the justice system and the way that the 1,500 January 6th protesters were treated? Do you accept there's been a clear double standard here?
I think there's been an obscene double standard, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because if BLM members, if Black, Muslim, Indigenous Americans were to do what MAGA members did, first and foremost, we wouldn't even gotten to the Capitol because we would have been shot dead. And secondly, the fact that Donald Trump, wait for it, Donald Trump and his fans celebrate the January 6th insurrectionists, right? These are people, wait.
But why aren't you answering my question?
I will. I kept quiet.
It's a bad answer. He doesn't want to answer it.
No, I am. January 6th, violent insurrectionists, MAGA members attacked Capitol Police, number one. They invaded the Capitol. They smeared shit in the Capitol. Some of them came with weapons with the intention to assassinate Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. And some of the violence that was done against 140.
But why aren't you answering my question?
No, hold on a second.
But John, you got to answer my question.
Hold on.
Yeah, Jacob, I will come to you, Jacob.
Guys, who wants to be a mod?
The moment he's answered my question.
Before we get too deep, who wants to be a mod in the chat? Who wants to be a mod in the chat? And make sure you guys like and subscribe and send the super chats. Let's return.
I'll come to you, Jacob.
Yeah. So no BLM protesters or Antifa protesters participated in a violent insurrection. Number one, none of them attacked the police like January 6th insurrectionists who were praised by Donald Trump. And number three, if they did
attack police. They did attack
the
police.
Right wing.
What do you mean
many BLM rioters attacked police? What are you talking about?
Did they take flagpoles and beat the police?
Sorry,
many
BLM rioters attacked police. On that point, let me bring back Winston. I mean, you know more about this probably than we do, but this idea, I certainly think there's merit to it. But this idea that there was a double standard in the collective way that the BLM.
Thanks for the super chat. 81 million votes for Biden. Get the F out of here. It was totally stolen. J6 wouldn't have happened if it weren't. Oh my gosh. Hey, that's a good point. That's a good point. He said 81 million votes for Biden. I think that's the most votes any president has ever gotten. I may be wrong though, but yeah, he has a good point. They need to investigate where those votes came from. Point blank period. That's the foundation of J6, in my opinion. Thank you for the super chat.
Protesters were treated compared to the collective way January 6th protesters were treated. What do you feel about that?
Well, here's the difference. Again, I'm glad we all can at least agree that violence on law enforcement is not okay. But here's the difference. Those riots, again, I'm not condoning what happened to across any major city that experienced those in the summer of 2020. However, a city block in Minneapolis, even in downtown DC, is very different than the United States Capitol, which is our sacred hall of democracy. And this temple that, for me personally, I spent years making so many personal sacrifices in service to Congress, in service to our nation. And so the difference there is, what happens rioting on the street, of course, that's not okay, but that is very different than attacking on a specific day when a presidential election is being certified, the actual results. Again, we have not seen any credible evidence that the election was stolen besides the president's claims that it was in 2020.
I mean, I would say that. Okay, I would say, Winston, before I go to Jacob to respond, he wants to.
Well, I would say look at the vote count. He had the most votes ever. He had an extremely large amount of votes. And I'm not gonna lie, Biden is not more popular than Obama. I'm sorry. Obama was the most popular. It's Barack Obama. So how did he get that many votes? It's not about the fact that he won the election. It's the fact that he got that many votes. Come on. That is a little suspicious. You can't even lie.
To respond. And all I would say to that is, I get your point that it happened at the Capitol, and therefore to the world watching, it was worse in a way. But in the end, violence is violence is violence. And statistically, there was a lot more violence collectively over the period of these BLM riots through that long, hot, very difficult summer than there was on January the 6th. And
there wasn't, Pierce.
Well, there was.
No,
there was. A lot more people.
Yes, it was.
Well, a lot more people died.
Yes, it was. It went on for months.
A lot more people died. A lot more police officers were attacked, right? I mean, every statistic would suggest that there was a lot more violence over a longer sustained period of time. And all I would say, Winston, is in the end, violence is violence is violence, particularly against police officers. More police were attacked over that summer.
When you have violence with a political goal, that's the definition of terrorism. So that's
what was happening in 2020, dude.
So Winston, are you saying that? So Winston, would you categorize? Hang on, Jacob. I will come to you. So Winston, would you categorize what happened on January 6th as an act of terrorism?
Well, certainly by some, yes. And I think, what the challenge here is in this conversation, the summer of 2020 has been so lumped in with this general thing. We can't talk about what happened that summer because each city was different. Each experience of each officer was different. And so to sort of lump it all in together isn't really factual. It's not fair to actually the facts. And again, I respect all those law enforcement officers who were injured that summer and who continue to serve. Same with Capitol Police too. But we cannot lump in riots that happened in Minneapolis versus other cities and then sort of compare, and then use that to justify what happened on January 6th. That's absolutely false.
Jacob, your response to that?
Yes. Okay, first of all, the media lied. What we saw with January 6th was a massive, massive politically motivated psyop that was based on a politically motivated setup. All right. All with the fingerprints of regime change, all with the hallmarks of.
I think calling it an act of terrorism is a little bit extreme. Just based off of what I'm hearing, terrorism? Wow, that is an interesting perspective.
Regime change here. Now, look, when the media said that this was the worst attack on the Capitol in our nation's history, they were wrong because the Weather Underground literally bombed the Capitol. That's the left. Oh, and by the way, the guy Bill Ayers that was a part of the Weather Underground, the bombing of the Capitol, he was pardoned by Obama and later actually got involved with the Department of Education in the Obama administration. There's also the time that a bunch of Puerto Ricans actually shot congressmen inside the Capitol. I believe that was also a leftist cause as well. So what has happened and what we've seen with this J6 narrative is that the media has pushed this insurrection narrative over and over again. They've used trigger words and trigger images to create an instinctual and an emotional response in the subconscious mind, telling people their country and their democracy is under threat. And they made people like me their psyop poster boy, which was a very large mistake. Because the fact of the matter is nothing that they said about me on January 6th was true. They had the audacity to say that I call myself the QAnon shaman, for God's sake. None of that's true. So like every bit of the narrative of J6 is a lie. They told us that police officers died. That's not true. They knew it wasn't true. They avoided the fact of talking about the fact that actually 4 protesters died on that day, not just Ashley Babbitt, but Rosalind Boyland and 2 others, many of which were victims of police brutality. Okay, they didn't talk about the cover-up with Yogananda Pittman or Tom Manger when he came in.
This is going crazy.
This thing stinks to high heaven. And anybody that can't see that it stinks and how it involves like nefarious agents within our own government or 51 intelligence agents or something, you got another thing coming.
Jacob, what were you actually convicted of?
That's a good question.
I pled guilty to the 1512 charge, which is the obstruction of an official proceeding that the Supreme Court said was not applicable, and it was being used to bend the law and gain convictions out of people that just trespassed into the building.
Vinny, it's fascinating to talk to Jacob. I have to say, I didn't know which way the interview would go. It's been really interesting. It's very interesting listening to Winston and hearing that perspective as well. What should we learn from all this? Obviously, nobody ever wants to see what happened that day happen again. This is one of the great symbols of American democracy, the greatest, arguably, the Capitol. You don't ever want to see that kind of thing again.
No, you don't. And the thing is, we have
sorry, Jacob, that was for Vinny, actually. That was for Vinny, actually. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
Jacob.
sorry.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's all good, Jacob. Well, Piers, I mean, at the end of the day, this violent rhetoric that Waj was talking about, like the violent rhetoric, the majority of it, the 99% of it was from the other side. And Piers, you guys keep talking about free and fair election and there's no evidence. You want me to believe the same justice system that has been trying to destroy Trump for freaking 9 years to believe them when it comes to an election, Piers. I don't. The irregularities were all over the place. Your guys' circle, your bubble, you don't see it. We've seen it.
Well, no,
okay?
what I would say,
I've seen
Vinny,
the documentary.
no, Vinny, to be clear, what I would
Go
say
ahead.
is even Republican judges have not established that. So even the judges on your side have not been able to establish what you're saying.
Well,
he lost.
Piers,
It's
Piers,
okay.
I don't
he
have
lost
a
in
side.
2020.
I'm not a Republican. Piers, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not, Piers. I vote for what's right, okay? I vote for what's right and what's wrong. And the Republican, when you say Republican, you label them Republican. Liz Cheney's a Republican.
Right.
Who the hell in the Republican Party trusts her, Piers? So yes, Piers, the day was ugly. I guarantee this guy can't even define insurrection. Nobody was shooting. Nobody was doing anything. They were pissed off, Piers, and they had a right to be pissed off. And like I said it again, if you have a problem with the system, Piers, you go to the system. You don't burn down your city. And he was saying, how long did the BLM riots go for? Cops were murdered, and he's saying nothing violent happened. They were throwing Molotov cocktails that were hitting police officers. And if we don't want it, Piers, we don't want this to ever happen again. Okay, we have to be open. We have to be transparent. Okay, when questions are asked, the government has to answer them, Piers. And when the president, the sitting president, requests 10,000 National Guard troops, his request should be answered. Okay, Piers? It was a shit show from the beginning to the end.
Hey, he's spitting facts. If you request 10,000 troops, yeah, send the troops. I feel like though this whole thing could have been avoided if they just sent the troops. I feel like if we just sent the troops, none of this would have happened. But apparently they're saying that Nancy Pelosi blocked the troops. That would be wild if she did. That would be a little weird to me. Why would you block the troops if you're considering them terrorists? I don't know. That's just really strange to do.
And Pelosi and them wanted it. Let me finish. And they used it, Piers. They've been using it. Just like Russia collusion didn't work, Piers. This was their Russian collusion of 2000 for this election. They thought this was going to be the got you.
Okay, with Jahat, you got literally like 30 seconds to respond quickly.
Yeah, I think it's very important that Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes are coming home. These are people who said they were part of a violent right-wing group. They said that they're the army of Donald Trump, and Stuart Rhodes said that he is for a civil war. 14 people were convicted for seditious conspiracy, more than any other time since the Civil War. These are the people that MAGA, Vinny, and Donald Trump are celebrating as patriots and hostages who wounded 140 Capitol police officers and engaged in a violent insurrection to overthrow our free and fair election, which Joe Biden won in 2020.
But you know the difference, Jahat, between you know the difference between the pardons that Trump did and the pardons that Biden did is that we don't even know what Biden was pardoning, even with his own family. We don't know what crimes they all got up to, if they did, because we'll never know, because they've got a preemptive get-out-of-jail-free card. On the side of the protesters, they all went to prison pretty much, right? It's a different situation. There's only ever been one preemptive pardon in the history of America, and that was Gerald Ford with Richard Nixon, as Victor Davis Hanson said. An amazing stat that Biden has broken all records for preemptive pardons and for pardons. And that trashes his legacy, but it also makes it very difficult to then take the high moral ground with all of this stuff with the Biden ones, with the Trump ones. I've got to leave it there. Thank you, particularly to you, Winston. Thank you for your service and for what you went through that day. For all the years that you worked at the Capitol, we can all agree on that. And Jacob, I'm actually pleased you are out. I think that you're an interesting person to talk to about all this. And you weren't violent on the day. I think those who were violent, it's a different situation. But it's good to see you on Uncensored. And I hope that now you're out again. You can be a force for good, as I'm sure you'll try to be.
This is a really good video. I actually learned a lot. And I learned a lot from the comments as well regarding what actually happened on this day. I do see a lot of hypocrisy. I feel as though the people on the left, especially the guy in the middle, he's saying that they're domestic terrorists and they're all these things, but then they will say, okay, what about the BLM protests? What happened to that? What about Biden pardoning more people in history than anyone else? He'd be like, well, I'm not here to talk about that. That's not really fair. Also, the one with the American flag, it took him a while to condemn violence against police officers. He didn't want to at first, but he eventually did. But all in all, this was a very good video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm gonna end the stream here. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one.